Hey y'all, this is Darren Van Dam, and you are watching Flick Connection, and today we're talking about 10 of the most rewatchable movies released in the last 10 years. So not only does this list feature some of my favorite movies from the past 10 years, and not only are these good movies, but these are the types of movies that get better the more times you watch them. And there are plenty of movies that are fantastic the first time you watch them, and then after you know the twist and what's going on, they're not nearly as good. In this video, we're talking about movies that transcend that, movies that have elements that rise above the storytelling. Whether they be funny little personal moments peppered throughout, like in Goodfellas.
Funny how? I mean, what's funny about it?
Or plot lines so twisted you need multiple viewings to understand them, movies like Fight Club.
That's right.
Or movies like The Shawshank Redemption, where every single scene is enjoyable and rewatchable no matter how many times you've seen it. We have not had too many movies like that over the past decade or so, but in this video we're talking about 10 of them that have released since 2013. And there's only one movie on this list released in 2022, and that's mainly because not enough time has passed to really tune into how rewatchable any movies from this year have been, with one exception: The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent.
What's the worry here, Nick? You've lost some of your talent as an actor?
No.
Now, in order to enjoy this movie, you do have to be a fan of Nicolas Cage. Not a rabid fan or anything like that, but you do need to appreciate him. If you're only familiar with his big budget movies and you think his acting style is kind of silly, then this movie's not really even going to make sense to you. But in this movie, he plays himself, or rather a version of himself, maybe a little too close to the version most of us see him as, but obviously this is not the real him. Yet he does really lean into the way pop culture views Nicolas Cage, or at least the writers leaned into that pretty hard.
I saw if you were a national treasure.
No, that'd be the stunt department.
Not according to the making of featurette.
Fine, I'll go. Wait.
So you're gonna go? I'm going with you.
I thought this was brilliantly written, and especially at a time where we haven't had a lot of great comedy movies. I mean, really great ones. Like, you maybe seen stuff that has made you laugh in recent years, but not comedies that hold up for decades. This, I think, is one of those movies, or at least the laughs are on par with classic comedy movies. But again, you really do need to be a fan of Nicolas Cage to appreciate most of the humor in The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, including appreciating the title.
You're Nick Cage!
My number 9 pick changes things up quite a bit with one of the most intense yet very personal stories to have come out in the past decade, and this is one that got noticed. A lot of people noticed. In fact, it was nominated for multiple Academy Awards despite being a smaller movie: Whiplash.
Oh my dear God. Are you one of those single tear people? Do I look like a double f***ing rainbow to you?
Now, this is actually based on a short film by the same name, which you can look up. It's a fantastic short film. J.K. Simmons plays the same character in it. And what I love about Whiplash is it is a story we've seen before. It's a struggling musician. Whether it be a musician or an artist or any sort of creative endeavor. We've seen sort of coming-of-age things for creative types over the years. Some of them are biographical, some of them are original works like this, but Whiplash managed to capture an element, not just of becoming a musician, but of trying to become the top person in your particular field. It captured the stress that people can put themselves under in situations like that, but it also captured the magic of it, and I think that's where Whiplash really excelled, more specifically in its conclusion. I mean, the way that this movie ends is near perfect. I was blown away by the final moments of this movie and enjoyed the entire ride all the way through. And ultimately, this is the smallest movie on this list. I would even say the smallest story, but it does have some of the bigger moments out of everything on this list. It really is spectacular, and Whiplash does such a good job of connecting you with the struggles of the main character. You really do feel what he's going through, and I personally have loved it over the years and have watched it many times. In the top pinned comment down below, you'll find a full list of the movies discussed in this video, as well as where you can currently stream them in your respective country, but availability will change over time, so make sure you've clicked that subscribe button and the little bell icon. That way you get notified when these videos release and you don't miss the movies before they're gone. My next pick is a somewhat recent release from one of my favorite directors, and not only that, it was Guy Ritchie's what I consider to be a glorious return to the gangster genre.
His name was Fahak, but spelled with a PH, so it sounds like Fahak. So it's Fahak.
So if you don't know, Guy Ritchie's first couple of movies included Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch, both considered some of the greatest in their genre ever made. And similar to Tarantino, sort of invented a subgenre that they continue to make movies done in Guy Ritchie's style. He long since moved away from that genre, has done all sorts of different things, including Sherlock Holmes, but he has come back to it. And what I love about The Gentleman is that it fits in line with his other gangster movies, yet it's more polished, it's more refined. You can tell he's got more experience behind the camera, more experience telling stories, and it has some powerhouse performances in it. If you remember, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, it's a movie I love, but it does have some terrible performances in it, which I kind of didn't mind with that movie. It's kind of the raw edge that that movie has, but The Gentleman has a different flavor, yet it still feels like Guy Ritchie. Now, the reason it's so rewatchable is the same reason his other movies are highly rewatchable. The banter, the lines, all the little moments, they're all fantastic little scenes that you could almost take out of context, and Matthew McConaughey is in half of them, and he's delivering a dynamite performance. He's not doing it too serious, he's not playing around too much, he's somewhere in the middle, and it is fun to watch, and I could say the same thing about Colin Farrell.
Now, if you're gonna stab Trigger. Don't, dance.
Even though he's definitely hamming it up a little bit more, it is incredibly fun to watch. The story is fairly straightforward, it's got its twists and turns, but as I said in the beginning, everything else, all the great little scenes that are so well written, the little banter scenes with all the different characters that get to interact with each other in The Gentleman, all of those things help elevate this above what is just kind of a ordinary, somewhat mediocre story.
I forgot to wash my hands.
Now, the story that unfolds in my number 7 pick is far from ordinary. Some of you probably guessed that Christopher Nolan would make an appearance on a list like this, and while he did make some bangers over the last decade, the one I think is the most rewatchable is Tenant. Now, Tenant is a unique case on this list because not only is it enjoyable to rewatch, you kind of have to rewatch it at least once to try to understand what's going on because it is so confusing. If you think it wasn't, I promise you, you missed a lot. There's a lot going on in this movie, more than really anybody could grab in one pass, which some critics had a problem with. They seem to think you should be able to watch a movie once, completely understand it, and walk away with it. I get that. I would say that applies to most movies, but occasionally it is nice to get something that's a little bit more of a puzzle. Just like Inception, which easily could have found a place on this list if it had come out in the last 10 years, Tenet is an exceptional sci-fi film that rises above most of what is released by being different. So much of what gets released today is repackaged, reboxed, and shipped out really quickly. It's things we've all seen before, and Christopher Nolan has a knack for bringing very new things to the screen, and I thought Tenet was a fantastic example of that. It's not necessarily my favorite Christopher Nolan movie, but it's a very ambitious thing to try to pull off in a 2-hour movie, and I think he managed to do it even though you can't quite grasp as much as you might like on that first viewing. My number 6 pick is probably the least known movie on this list, but longtime subscribers should definitely know about Hell or High Water.
Start the car! Shit.
This is a movie I have been praising for years. If you've never seen it, the way I would describe it is it's kind of like a Coen Brothers film, but it's a little less Coen-y than most Coen Brothers movies, which, by the way, did not make anything on this list. I've not been a huge fan of their work over the last decade, even though I consider a handful of their movies to be some of the most rewatchable movies ever made. But Hell or High Water stars Chris Pine and Ben Foster, one of my absolute favorite actors working today, as a couple of brothers in West Texas that start knocking off banks. So there's multiple bank heists that all feel very real and quick. It feels like real crime, not this big drawn-out heist sequence. And then you get Jeff Bridges hunting them down, and that's not the only sort of Coen Brothers touch this movie has.
So either you don't want the corn on the cob, or you don't want the green beans. So what don't you want?
There's quite a bit of levity to this movie and some really serious moments as well. It's got a beautiful balance. This is one of those movies that is not only highly rewatchable because it's so entertaining every time you watch it, but it's also broadly appealing. As I said, this is one I've recommended quite a few times over the years, and I found most people that watch this channel tend to love this movie as much as I do. Now, considering the fact that there are so many superhero movies released nowadays, there's almost never not one in the movie theaters, there's bound to be one on this list. There's actually 3 that I considered putting up, one of them being Deadpool for several reasons. One, I just love that it went for that hard R rating. That's something that was really popular in the 80s and 90s with action movies, and then it was really phased out in favor of PG-13, and Deadpool brought it back. And it is a highly rewatchable movie just because the lines and all the action and everything in it is so good. I would also say something similar about The Suicide Squad. Even though I know probably half of you watching didn't really like this movie, I loved it. I thought the humor was on point at every single moment. It's maybe a little bit too funny to be considered a serious action movie, but still, I loved everyone in it. Almost love everything about it.
Who's Milton?
What?
I don't remember any Milton.
He has been with us the whole time!
Somebody named Milton has been with us the whole time.
Yes!
But the one that I picked, the one that I've certainly watched the most since it was released, is gotta be Guardians of the Galaxy.
Oh, yeah.
This still holds up as my absolute favorite Marvel movie. There's no question I've watched it more than any other. And it's because of the humor. It is so funny. And the jokes are all so interesting and unique that they're well worth watching multiple times and well worth sharing with people multiple times. That's why I love this one so much. Not to mention, it's one of the more dazzling Marvel movies ever made, mainly because it takes place in space and you're in all these incredible locations in the first one. I'm also a fan of the second, but at first, Guardians of the Galaxy is one of the more solid movies of its kind I've maybe ever seen.
I just saved Quill.
We've already established that you destroying the ship that I'm on is not saving me.
When did we establish?
Like 3 seconds ago!
I wasn't listening. I was thinking of something else.
Now, I mentioned Goodfellas at the top of the video, and longtime subscribers know that is my favorite movie of all time, Martin Scorsese being my favorite director of all time, and he makes this list with what I consider to be one of his more rewatchable movies, maybe even second to Goodfellas, The Wolf of Wall Street.
And my wife, my wife is my cousin or whatever, but it's not like what you think, whatever, you know.
Is she like a first cousin or is she?
Yeah, no, she, you know, her father is the brother of my mom.
Now, obviously, this one is a comedy, even though there's some heavy stuff going on in it. Speaking of comedy, though, this is the movie that I think cemented Leonardo DiCaprio as a legend. Now, some of you may think he was already there before this movie, and you would be right. He was a legendary dramatic actor. This showed that he could do comedy incredibly well, making him a very well-rounded actor. Jonah Hill really elevated not only his career, but he elevated that character in this movie. And The Wolf of Wall Street is another great example of a movie that is better than the sum of its parts. And it's made up of great parts. Martin Scorsese, DiCaprio, an incredible script based on a best-selling book. I mean, there's so many great elements, but if you just watch this scene right here with DiCaprio and Kyle Chandler, the way that they parry and joust in this one scene explains the movie and is why this is such a good movie. Not because there's one good scene, but because almost every single scene in the movie is as good as this one, and it's just wildly entertaining. It's funny at every turn, yet it makes a strong point about a lot of different things at the same time.
Hey, Ma, we got chicken or what?
But believe it or not, DiCaprio makes it on the list again in the only other comedy I think he's ever done. Margot Robbie also stars in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Whoa. Here I come. Oh, here I come. Oh.
Now, I did a live stream about this movie after its premiere night, and I was really not that enchanted with this movie. It was far from my favorite Tarantino movie. Multiple viewings have tuned me into this movie so well, it's now one of my favorites of his. Now, it probably is Tarantino's slowest movie, but therein lies why I love it. Not because it's slow, but because despite how slow the story reveals itself, it's incredibly entertaining, just like The Wolf of Wall Street, where you get these amazing little microcosm scenes that are fantastic on their own.
Look, we're really sorry we disturbed you.
Look, Chief, you don't belong here. Now take this mechanical asshole and get it off my fucking street!
There are so many different scenes in this movie that all mesh together. They all feel like they belong in the same movie, but they're incredibly different from each other in terms of their tone, their flavor, yet they all work together incredibly well. I mean, Tarantino is most famous for the banter that he writes, and while he's maybe written some better scenes, like the opening scene to Inglourious Basterds, I would say as a whole, that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood has some of the best banter he has written since Reservoir Dogs.
Kristen, the Nazi's there! Oh, shit, that's all right, that's too hot. Anything we can do about that heat?
Rick, it's a flamethrower.
Yeah.
Okay, my number 2 pick on this list is going to be a little bit polarizing, but please let me explain why I ranked Mad Max Fury Road so incredibly highly on this list.
Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!
Now, right off the bat, the action in this movie is non-stop. Action movies get major points for me from that. There's nothing worse than going to see an action movie that has barely any action in it. So right there, in my opinion, you've got a great movie that's wildly entertaining. But not only is the action non-stop in Mad Max Fury Road, and not only are the performances fantastic, and not only is it an incredible looking movie, but the way that the action is orchestrated is some of the most perfectly directed action I've ever seen, and I've seen probably every major action movie ever made more than once. If you didn't tap into it the first time you watched it, you thought the plot was maybe a little silly, you didn't get into the big post-apocalyptic circus that this movie is, I'm telling you, the way that the story is structured, and more importantly, the way each action sequence is structured, down to every single cut, every single shot, every single little piece of information you're given as the action unfolds, is some of the best, tightest storytelling you're gonna see in an action movie ever made out of any decade. So the filmmaking and storytelling here are just some of the best on this entire list. Even if you don't like the post-apocalyptic stuff, it really is amazing. One of the reasons it's that good is because they spent a very long time writing, storyboarding, and producing this movie. Tom Hardy even famously was bummed and didn't think that it was going to be very good as they were filming it because it just wasn't making sense to him, and apologized at the premiere because it turned out so incredibly well. They are making a sequel. I personally cannot wait to see it. I hope it's close to as good as Mad Max Fury Road. If it's not, I will gladly just watch Fury Road a couple of times. Okay, now my number 1 pick is not my favorite movie on this list. I know it's a little confusing, but I consider Parasite to actually be the most rewatchable movie released in the past 10 years. Let me explain. So similar to Tenant, Parasite is intended to be watched multiple times, immediately earning it a spot on a list like this. You take a movie like Tenant, the complicated, confusing aspect of it is the concept. It's the world you're in. It is the idea behind the story. In Parasite, however, the story is the complicated puzzle. And Parasite is a fantastic watch on the first viewing. It's confusing, you know something's off, you don't quite know what's going on. But what's so amazing about it is that once you know what's happening, it's even more entertaining. You're sort of in on the joke with Parasite on a second viewing, and it makes for a wildly different viewing experience. Parasite is a movie that is designed to surprise the audience over and over again, and not surprise them with big dazzling effects, surprise them with little twists and turns in the story that you definitely won't see coming.
제가 아까 미술심리학, 미술치료 쪽으로도 공부 중이라고 말씀드렸죠? 네네. 다송이한테 무슨 일이 있었나요, 1학년 때?
But again, what's so amazing about this movie is when you know what's coming, it's somehow even more interesting. And it's not just because of the way that it's written, it also has a lot to do with the way that it's shot. Things that you can see in the frame, the first viewing, you may think nothing of, and then they'll have an entirely different meaning on that second viewing, making Parasite kind of a marvel. Now, there are other movies that do that, but not to the extent that Parasite does. It really is kind of a magic trick of a movie, which is what makes it so fantastic and so highly rewatchable, despite the fact that it's in a foreign language and you have to read every word that's said. I still put this at the top of a list of bangers. As I said, there are movies I like better, but I do consider Parasite to be the most highly rewatchable movie released in the past 10 years or so. Again, go check that top pinned comment for the full list of where you can watch them in your country. But I will keep making these videos as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this special episode, and you will see me on the next one.